This is Make It Mentionable. I'm Alyssa Patmos, and this is the show about being human in a world that encourages us to be robots. I invite you to join me as we journey through the mess, the magic, and the mania in between, because what we can talk about, we can manage. This honest conversation extravaganza includes free-flowing conversations and high doses of vulnerability to remind you that you aren't alone. No topic is off limits, and episodes are designed to leave you smarter, aka more self-aware than when you came. I am so glad you're here. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Make It Mentionable. I'm your host, Alyssa Patmos, and today I am here with Linda Ugelow, who has this unique skill of helping people get over their fear of speaking, which we've all seen. Who's the one that makes the joke around people having the fear of public speaking? Yes,
Seinfeld. You'd rather be in the casket than say the eulogy.
Yes. So we know this is a common fear that permeates the world, but I think it comes out in even more nuanced ways where we get scared of showing up, or sometimes we get scared of just sharing our opinion in a smaller group of friends. And so it's not just speaking on stages, but being more of ourselves around other people, which is always what my work centers around. And Linda has a specialty in helping people become more comfortable being seen and having their voices be heard. And so I wanted to bring Linda on so we could have a conversation about all the ways that this fear runs under the surface and what on earth we can do about it. So Linda, thank you so much for being here.
I'm really happy to have this conversation with you today.
So I gave people a little bit of background, but obviously not very much. And I tend to think reading bios is boring, and I like to hear it straight from the source. So to fill people in a little bit on who you are, what do they need to know? What lights you up?
Yeah. So right now I find myself as a speaking confidence coach or a speaking empowerment coach, and I'm author of the book Delight in the Limelight, which details the process that you can go through to go from a place of anxiety or nervousness about putting yourself out there or sharing your ideas or speaking anywhere, really, whether it's online or in person, and get to a place where you can feel like it's one of your happy places where you do delight in the limelight. And
so,
this was, go on.
No, go ahead. It's all good.
I was wanting to share that this comes about not from a natural talent that I have, but more from my own journey of feeling very inhibited, very shy, and remorseful about almost any time I spoke. You know, those conversations where you think, oh, I wish I had said that, or I shouldn't have said that, and it would carry on inside me for days. So that was kind of where I was coming from. And I was a dancer, I think, because I was comfortable expressing myself in movement, but not in words. And even though I've been a stage performer, I was part of a women's world music group for 40 years. If you asked me to introduce a song, it was like the worst part of the job. I just did not want, just saying the name of a song was too much public speaking for me. And It wasn't until I became an online entrepreneur and needed to create more visibility for the work that I did that I realized that I had this problem. No, let me step back, because I knew it was a problem, but I always thought I could just push through it, or at least in more recent history, I got to a place where I felt like I can just push through this. And if you look up online how to get over the fear of speaking, you'll see all the memes of feel the fear and do it anyway, ignore it, don't let it hold you back. The magic happens outside the comfort zone and all these things. So I swallowed the pill and I figured, okay, I'm just going to show up and I'll manage the fear, because fear comes with the territory, right? Everybody has it, or most everybody has it, and you just learn to manage it, or you take some drugs or whatever. And I'm a movement specialist, as a dancer, and I also have a master's degree in expressive arts therapies in movement studies. And movement therapy was always my jam. But I left that some time ago. That being said, I have all these tools of managing my energy. So when the Periscope app came out, which was the first live streaming app, I jumped on to be an early adopter, and I figured this is terrifying, but big deal. I will do what I have to do to get myself ready to go. And so I'd spend about, I don't know, 30, 45 minutes, like meditating and jumping jacks and power poses and affirmations and all these things to get me in the right headspace to go on for 5 or 10 minutes. And I thought, okay, after some period of time, I'll get to a place of comfort and ease. Well, after 10 weeks of going on every single day, I was daily broadcasting. I realized, oh my God, I'm still anxious. I am able to manage it, but my gosh, I'm having to manage it every single day. And it wasn't changing. I didn't feel like I significantly got more confident. And that's when I realized, that was back in 2015. That's when I realized, you know what? I am showing up, but I don't like the way this feels, and I just want to get rid of it. So I figured out a way to get rid of it.
I love what you're talking about here, because, and so much of your work is about getting to the root cause. And I love finding people who are interested in the root cause, because so often we operate at the surface. And for me, the root cause is hey, it can be something so small that we just interpreted in a way that we didn't even realize we made it mean this mountain. And then we just accumulated a bunch of beliefs about that afterwards. And now it feels like this thing that we just have to climb over and over and over again. And that's how some of those messages that you were saying, like the just do it and the take a shot. Like you hear that one a lot before speaking too. It's how those things come in, and it just becomes like, we're going to manage the symptoms, like very similar to healthcare in a lot of ways. Like we're just going to go and manage the symptoms. But that's not addressing what is going on internally for us.
Yep.
And
that's right. So
what I love that you tailor it.
Yes, well, truthfully, to be totally honest, I had no idea that I needed to get to the root cause. As I said, I just swallowed the pill of what I saw online being talked about. But when I got to that day, I decided to take a step back, and I made a list of all the modalities and practices I knew to address this problem. And I, looked at my list and I thought, where to start? And I picked out this one thing called focusing, which is where you feel inside your body for where something lives, and then you ask it, what is it trying to say? So I felt in my body this fear of, speaking up. And I asked myself, if this fear could speak, what would it say? And what came back to me immediately was, I'm going to be attacked. And I thought, wow, is this like saber-toothed tiger, cellular memory kind of a thing on the savannah? Or is it my personal history? And as soon as I asked myself that question, a memory popped in my head of my 2 older sisters attacking me every time my mom put me in the center of attention. She would say, why can't you girls be more like Linda? Because I was a goody-goody. I put my clothes away whenever she asked me to, and everybody else was a slob. But whenever she lifted me up on the pedestal, my sisters got really pissed off, understandably. And as soon as mom left the scene, they would attack me, and they'd call me stupid and tell me to shut up. They kick my shins or pin me on the floor, tickling me till I cried, these kinds of things. And it kind of bled over to other parts of our relationship in the house. Like if I started to sing along with a record, they'd say, shut up, stupid. So there was always this feeling of inhibition, that I wasn't allowed, or I wouldn't be loved. I wasn't, no one wanted to hear me. No one wanted to hear my voice. And also the idea that if I'm in the center of attention, I'm going to be attacked. And then I just had this, I don't like to say epiphany, because it just made so much sense. It was like, of course, I feel this way, that I don't want to be the center of attention. It feels dangerous to me because that memory lived on in my body. And then everything kind of fell into place. It's like, oh, what else is there? What other root causes? What other comments, little or big,
Mhm.
were made to me, or what kind of abuses might I have suffered, being bullied or rejected or hurt in some way that made it seem unsafe to be seen and heard. Once I knew I had something to clean up, I actually had the tools to do it with. I just didn't know. All these times I had the tools, but I didn't know I had those things that I had to address.
Right.
So it was almost like in plain sight of me all the time, the
Mhm.
solutions, but I just didn't realize that there were these deeper issues playing around somewhere in my psyche. And, once, I mean, this is the amazing thing. Once I realized I had these things, and I did apply myself pretty intensively after I realized this, but my racing heart was gone in a week.
Mm.
I've never really had that level of anxiety again since 2015.
Yeah, I find in similar things, because again, getting to the root work is critical, whether you're talking about speaking or whether you're talking about conflict in relationships, or being seen, or why you're going to the fridge constantly. Like, getting to the root for any of that, it's these sneaky tiny little beliefs that we can't always see for ourselves. And then once we see them, all of a sudden, like, the power can loosen. And then, like you said, we can apply other tools that help us break it free even more. And I think so many times we have this belief that it has to be this really long, arduous process to heal something. And it doesn't always.
Yeah.
My story around why I got hindered in showing up at times was because when I was in fifth grade, I was doing a talent show with a friend, and I loved to dance at the time. We were supposed to be doing a dance in the school talent show, and she was sick. And so she didn't show up. And I then had this whole dance planned out with her. And I'm proud of myself because I made the decision to do it anyway. But halfway through, I'm like dancing, and I forget everything. I forget every movement, and I make it up for a while. But the 10 seconds where I was starting to make it up felt like an eternity. And eventually I gave out and I ran. Linda, I ran out of the gymnasium of the school to the playground in the middle of the dance. And so then I had beliefs around that, and it didn't feel safe. And one time I was joking around singing with a friend on the phone, and she told me I sucked. And I was like, what the heck? And so it's these moments similarly for me where we make them mean other things, or it threatens our safety. Like, no wonder it didn't feel safe at times for me to be seen, because I ran out of the talent show, and I've had direct feedback on who knows what mood she was in. And it builds up. And so we have the power, though, to rewrite some of that and to take back what we do with those scenarios. And so for you, you got to a place where your heart wasn't racing, and you're not having to spend 45 minutes preparing to do a live. And how does the process go when you start to see one of these beliefs popping up? What is, aside from, like, is it always the talking to it and identifying it in your body, or now that you have more experience with this and with your process, what else does it look like?
A lot of times I begin with clients to identify from that place, like, what is going on in your mind?
Mhm.
What are your concerns? What are you worried about? And I like doing that because if someone says, I'm afraid of being judged, or I'm afraid I'm going to look stupid, or I'm afraid that I'm going to go blank, freeze, then it's almost like following a thread back. Then we can ask, well, where in your life did you have that experience earlier on?
Mm.
Who did you feel judged by? Where were you made to feel stupid? And almost always it's like, oh, well, that time in third grade when Mr. McCulloch, asked me this question and I had no idea what it was, and everybody kind of turned and laughed or something. It could, it's oftentimes not even what happens to you, but what you see happen to others. And you make a decision, I'm not going to be in that position. That's not ever going to happen to me.
Mhm.
So we can feel traumatized by things that we witness as much as things that we have experienced personally. Yeah.
I think that's a super important point. And if you're willing, I'd like to talk about that in the context of cancel culture, because what we're seeing now is, in many ways, if you are on the fringe of something, or if people don't agree with you, then there's a chance of getting canceled. And when that's baked into the culture, that can be perceived as a threat of, oh, if I use my voice, my entire sense of belonging might be taken away, especially if ounces of our worth are wrapped up in how we're perceived by other people. So what do you notice from a speaking perspective around cancel culture?
Cancel culture is one of those environments that really is not safe. It's not a safe speaking environment. And however, the same truths or experience do prevail. That, first of all, not everyone's going to agree with you. Everybody is coming from their own place. They're doing the best they can. And they may be in a place of fear themselves. And certainly if they're in a majority and part of the common narrative, then people who are in the minority are going to be canceled.
Mm-hmm.
It's unfortunate. And I think it's contrary to what we need in order to feel safe to speak. But that being said, there are still safe places to speak. There are still people who will resonate with what you have to say. It may be that you have to look a little further to find the people that are willing to listen to you. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they agree with you, but they are open to you on a heart level. They may be family or friends that are open to and interested and curious about where you're coming from. And I think that it asks us to step up in our lives a little bit more conscientiously in how we share our truths. So I think that nobody can argue with your own experience. And if you come from that experience, it's your experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is something that you probably speak about in relationships also, right?
Yes, definitely.
So how would you make the connection there?
So for me, it's almost like articulating your feelings. It's like people can't argue with how you feel. It's how you feel, and it's okay. And like, we can't always control that. The feeling comes up, and then there are ways to diffuse it. There are ways to work through it. But someone can argue with the fact if I say I feel sad right now, that the way that you talked about, I love that. I call it claiming my experience. That was something that I had to work on very conscientiously, was what is the experience I can claim, and what are the stories that I can share? Because I agree with you. Like that's the piece then where we're sharing it from a place of story and from a place of, this is what I encountered and this is what it meant to me. And I think at its roots, story is one of the most human things. We've had paintings on cave walls depicting stories for ancient history. And so when we go back to that place, I think it softens some. And I encourage the same thing in relationships. When you can say it from the perspective of what you're witnessing, what you're feeling, what you're experiencing, it diffuses conflict much easier.
Yeah. And of course, we are able to do that more easily when we aren't being triggered. So the work that I do, I see fear as not a random emotion without a cause, but it's a trigger that points to these past experiences and messages that we received that led us to conclude that it wasn't safe in some way to be seen or outshine others or to show up or express ourselves the way we do. So we definitely have work to do to separate ourselves from other people's view of us. And separate ourselves from looking or needing or depending on other people's approval and validation for who we are. But that does take that, that's the work to get to that place. But once we're there, what's nice is that we can see people more clearly for who they are and understanding that everybody is where they are for a reason. And if you feel like you're coming up against somebody in some kind of a clash or a group of people or an entity or whatever, that you find a way to kind of flow around them. Because we are in this kind of flow of life. We are always evolving. And if we look at everything that comes up as, well, things happen, things get said, but that doesn't mean anything necessarily about me unless I choose it to be. And of course, we want to consider what others say in terms of, does this resonate? But we need to filter. We need to learn, even when people have our best interest in mind, we need to filter it, right? And certainly if people have our worst interest in mind, we definitely need to filter those things. Yeah.
So one of the other things that I hear, and I'm sure you hear it as well, is, well, my voice doesn't matter. Is that one that comes up with your clients?
For sure. And I think that often goes back to those feelings of, well, when did you feel like your voice didn't matter? Who wasn't listening to you that you really wanted to listen to you? Was it your father? Was it your sibling? Was it were friends? Did you, from my clients, I've heard so many different stories of really horrific kinds of abuse, where one client was actually looking for the neighborhood kids, and they were hiding in a shed, and they came out with rocks and they threw them at her.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So understandably, she got the feeling that people don't like her, don't want her around, are going to be mean and attacking. And she was terrified. She was terrified. Now I'm happy to say that she's like the regional director of the local Toastmasters in her area, which is really, really cool. But when she first started out in Toastmasters, they told her she looked like a deer in the headlights. Well, understandably, if that happened to you. And of course, as you said, it's rarely just one experience. It's, an accumulation of experiences that come together and create this block, this big kind of monolith of fear or anxiety. It doesn't have to be big, but it can also, as I said, doesn't have to be big. It can be small. Like I had a client who at school, there was a table of girls having lunch, an empty seat, and she was going to sit down there. And they said, no, we're saving this for somebody. So she went off and ate by herself, and noticed that nobody ever sat in that chair. Same thing, the same kind of response of nobody, people don't want to hear from me. Now, she also, that was connected also that in her family, at dinner time, back in the day when sales calls were made at dinner time to your landline, people who remember landlines. And in her family, that was the most disgusting, rudest thing that anyone could do. So here she was in sales, terrified of making phone calls, because not only did she have this experience in the lunchroom, but she also had this, as I said, it didn't happen to her, but she heard it being spoken to other people. If you do this, you are rude. you're despicable.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden you're in sales. So how do you go out and do your job then?
Right.
And it's rewiring these things. And same can happen for people who are writers. I was I was accused of plagiarism in college. I didn't plagiarize. Someone copied my homework and I didn't know that. And they turned in the same paper. Like, I think it was, I know exactly who it was. It was it was my boyfriend at the time's roommate. And I had let him in on my notes. I think I had probably even let him read my paper, trusting that, like, okay, use this as inspiration. Like, if you need to think about something, go do it. And he copied the whole thing, turned it in word for word. I didn't know this. And then all of a sudden I have the teacher, and I was like A+ student, like good girl in school. All of a sudden I have the teacher like writing me up for plagiarism, which was horrible for me. And so when I started writing more, I was so overly conscientious about people not thinking that I was plagiarizing or taking something from somewhere else. And that was actually, realizing this was what happened to me the first day of the NLP training that I went to. And it's why I got so into it, because when you realize that these events they function almost like a beaded bracelet, where you have all of these events that build up over time. And if you can go to like the first bead and undo the knot, the rest can fall off. You don't have to address them individually when you can realize, wait, that was the first time this happened. And everything after that was based on that fear.
Yes.
And life opens up so much more then.
Yes. I have found the exact same thing, that oftentimes, if we can go back and resolve that first experience, the others take care of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And oh, go ahead.
That's all right.
So my question here then is, we have these common beliefs that come up, the people don't want to hear from me, or my voice doesn't matter, or it doesn't feel safe. So then though, once we sort of reflect and we get rid of or minimize the impact of some of these root cause events that we've been talking about, there's still a process of having to retrain our brains in the safety of a new way. So how do you help people with that? Or what have you noticed from your own experience about, okay, I realized, wait, my heart isn't racing. So then how was it easier to proceed? What is that rewiring process like?
Yes. In my book, Delight in the Limelight, I have the inner freedom framework. The first step is to reveal and heal. So we didn't really talk about modalities, but we could. And the second one is to restore a sense of safety, which we kind of touched on in terms of the cancel culture. But mostly what we want to do is ensure that we are not perpetuating abuse within ourselves by the way we are speaking with ourselves, and to learn how to maximize and actually create safe spaces ourselves by understanding what we all need and what we're seeking in terms of feeling comfortable and relaxed around others to speak, which is minimizing the sense of judgment. So we need to minimize our own self-judgment and also help others to feel less judged, because as others feel less judged, they won't be coming from a place of fear either. And everybody starts to relax and open up. So I think that we can play a part in creating our own safe environments by providing it for other people. And then the third step is just what you're talking about now, which is repatterning your habits to build your confidence. So I look at that as rebuilding the way we think, the way we feel, experience in our bodies, including the way we use our voices, and kind of an emotional switches. So So let's say you are in the habit of being really tight, let's say in your voice, that when you get nervous, your voice constricts and you speak fast, or your voice gets really high, or maybe it gets really tight like this and really scratchy, and you don't know what to do with it. It just is tight. You don't know how to let go. So those are the kinds of things that we need to repattern so that our bodies reflect the place where we want to feel when we speak, which is more relaxed or energized or playful and loose, or I mean, whatever it is that you're looking for, you want to pattern that into your body in a new way that it hadn't been before. The same thing with our voice. We want our voices to feel like they are coming from our being, not just something that's floating in the air directly from the brain and, in some kind of monotone, but it actually is our vehicle to express what we mean. So people understand what we are trying to say. So there are so many ways that we can enjoy the sound of our voice that we have so forgotten since we were kids, learning how to speak. And it's amazing the complexity that we do every time we open our mouth to speak. I mean, our mouth, our lips, our tongue, our teeth, our throat, everything is working together to create these sounds that translate into meaning. It's really quite astonishing. And when you can allow yourself to reconnect with your actual vocal production, it brings you much more centered into your body and makes speaking like that level up more fun to do. I mean, like we open our mouth and it's this vibration, and that is, we don't pay attention to that incredible thing that we're doing to ourselves by vibrating our vocal cords.
I love that, because so much of what you said correlates to relationships too. And this is why I love having the show, because wherever someone finds an in, then it's like, okay, things can expand there. Awareness can expand there. And if it feels easier to tackle speaking rather than your relationship with yourself or your relationship in general right now, then that's great. Like, there are so many vehicles and doors to get the wisdom across. And I think ultimately what we're both getting back to is this integration of, our minds and our bodies, and they are meant to operate together. But fear and other triggers, painful experiences, it causes that severing at times. And then we become detached. And so in conflict, then what we have is someone who is tightening up in their body, or maybe pushing someone away. Like if you're in a fight with someone or you're in a disagreement, it's like, I have to shield myself. And then what's that doing to your vocal cords? What's that doing to how you're communicating your message? It's all coming across as defensive. And so the awareness of the body here, and some of these things that you just pointed out that operate below our conscious awareness so much of the time, it can be useful across the board in the softening of how we're getting our point across and how we're communicating, even in these high pressure or intense conversation periods when we feel like we need to defend ourselves.
Yeah.
So
I like that. I just want to piggyback on that, because one of the tools that I give to my clients, and I kind of, not at the very, very beginning of the book, but before I get into the whole root cause things, I give this suggestion of mentally rehearsing how we want something to go. And top athletes do this, Olympians do this, musical performers do this. They envision not just what they're going to say, but they envision how they want to feel and the energy of it and what it looks like and how they see themselves in motion, what it looks like on the outside. And when you do this, you are creating a new neural pathway in yourself for it to happen. And I actually started to use this many years ago when I knew I was going to have a hard conversation.
Oh, really?
I don't know where I came across it. I have no recollection, but I remember very distinctly that the times that I took a few minutes to visualize, okay, how do I want this conversation to go? Or it was a meeting that I knew was going to have, that kind of
Yeah.
a level of anxiety in it and emotions coming up. I thought, okay, how do I want to feel? How do I want to feel when I'm sitting there listening? How do I want to feel as I'm speaking? How do I want to feel afterwards? And I'd visualize myself, like if it was people that I was close with, I visualize us having a hug and smiling. And every single time that I utilized that technique, it went really well. Every
Yes.
single time.
I love that you used it for speaking. I love that it came up in conflict. I have used that too, because we're giving our minds a picture, like we're giving our body sort of a path to follow before we're even engaging in it. And I think one of the things that happens in conflict routinely is that we go to that place where we don't feel safe. Our nervous systems can get flooded. And so from there, then we don't, the only path out is that old picture of, well, how did I respond in the past when I didn't feel safe? And it's usually defensiveness. And so I love your second point, the second R. It was reveal and heal. And the third one's patterning, repatterning. What was
the
this?
second one? Was restore a sense of safety.
Okay, yes, restore a sense of safety. So I want to talk about that for a second, because I think that we have many things in the past 2 years that have disrupted our collective sense of safety. So that's going on. And then, we have our relationships, and sometimes those can be highly, highly enriching. And then we have periods where we're like, okay, wait, this doesn't feel perfectly safe right now. And I just mean that from like a nervous system response, or from like we're in a short conflict and I might not feel safe right now. So when you have those things going on, and then we have our critical self-talk that many people experience, that's all piling on to, okay, but now let me go show up on social media, or let me go lead this meeting, or let me step on stage. And so I have techniques that I've used for creating safety, but I want to know if you're willing to share some of yours. How can people begin to restore that sense of safety without it needing to take forever or have a bunch of other people around?
There are lots of ways that I help people get to that place, but ultimately you need to start with making a commitment and having an intention that you want all parts of yourself to be on the same team. That it just won't do to have, 3/4 of yourself going for one goal or facing one direction, and then this other team kind of opposing you. That just is not efficient. It's not going to get you where you want to go. So I think it starts with that awareness that would be a much better way to live and move forward in our lives, to feel like we are all on the same side. That means that you learn how to become your best advocate. Mm-hmm. And that critical voice, I know, like, for instance, Elizabeth Gilbert in her book, Big Magic. I don't know if you read that or if listeners have read that, but she talks about how she learned to put the critic in the back seat of the car and doesn't let the critic get at the controls. But the idea is that, the critic is always going to be there. I don't believe that's true. I feel that the critic is a part of ourselves that was also wounded, and that we do not naturally, as human beings, criticize ourselves. But it's learned this twisted way of protecting us, protecting ourselves, but underneath it really wants the same thing. It says to you, you're so stupid, you're looking foolish, not because it wants you to, but that it's afraid that you are. And so if we look at what the intention is of that critical voice, and we help it to express itself in a better way that is really more of a team player rather than a opposition player, and to embrace it in a place of understanding. So let's say the critic is not going to come out and say, oh, I'm so sorry. But you can say to your critic, I want to hear what you have to say. Tell me what's going on. Oh, you don't like how I lift my chin up? Well, what would you have me do? What would you like me to, how can I practice? What are some of your ideas? Because that critical voice actually is a voice of discernment, which has a lousy way of expressing itself. Probably yeah, go on.
One of the funniest things about this show is that, you know, when we are in relationships with people and they're mirrors back to us, mirror back for how we can grow or things to work on in ourselves. And one of my absolute favorite techniques I use is things with parts. So the wisdom that you just dropped, like I am in full alignment with, and I love how eloquently you explained it. The funny thing for me is, you know, sometimes we forget or we check out of certain tools of our own at times. And the funny thing about this show is sometimes I'll talk to someone and I'm like, oh, this came up for me. Like, yes, it's for listeners. And also this part of the conversation today is for me. And when it gets mirrored back to me in certain ways, it always just makes me chuckle. So thank you for bringing up parts, because I need to apparently to go do some parts work with myself. And I just want to add to what you were saying there. We often end up, you know, like with this critical voice, and it can take on a picture. It can look or feel like someone we know. And so for me, the extension that I do there, and I totally agree with you, it is a wounded part of us that is trying to have a voice. And when we integrate it, all of a sudden we get a piece back of our own voice. And that's the most beautiful thing on the planet. And so one extra step that I do there is I ask that part, what is its highest intention? And it usually starts out with something low, like, I don't know, like if I say, what is the highest intention of my perfectionist voice? Then it's like, to make everything look good. And, you know, that's a noble act, and it's a very surface level one. Eventually, if I keep asking that, it gets to, because I want you to feel safe, because I'm trying to protect you. Because if everything looks perfect, then who can attack you? And so they do share. It does share the same highest goal, which is exactly what you were articulating. Like, it wants to be on the same team. It wants to be there. And so I think this is so great, the wisdom that you're sharing around this for listeners. And it doesn't need to be this overly intellectual, take 5 million hours to get over it. It's sitting down with yourself and being willing to be honest with yourself around some of the things that you feel, and not having it have to be this willpower chasing down self-development sort of mindset. So thank you for bringing up parts.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, I talk about this in the book, that my daughter, when she was about 7, had thrown toys all over the floor, and I must have been tired, and I think I yelled. And she looked at me and she said, Mommy, I hear what you want to say, but can you say it in a nicer way?
What?
Yeah. I see your mouth open. And that's exactly how I felt. It was like, what? And I was so stunned by that. I just stopped for like 10 seconds. And then I said, yes, I can. And then I've carried that ever since. And I think it's a beautiful thing that we can say to ourselves when we hear that mean voice that say, I hear what you're saying. Can you say it in a nicer way? You know, like how we, we hear this all the time. How do you speak to somebody who you care about, and let that person be you?
Mm-hmm. And it's the remembering to do it, because, you know, you and I are embedded in that world. We help other people with it. And at times, like, it can be very hard to remember to use things with yourself. And then you get a wake up call in some fashion. And I love that one, because it's something that we can do. People don't have to see you doing it. It can be a pause, even in the middle of a conflictual conversation. It's like when when we get into disagreements with people, it can, or we get triggered by our partners. Sometimes if we realize we're being defensive, it's like, okay, there comes this decision point of if we can retreat or if we're going to double down. And oftentimes the defensive side can take over and we make the choice to double down. But in that moment, if we could use what you just said and remember our truer selves, remember like, oh wait, there is a piece of us that actually knows how to say this nicely. If we could pause and say, well, like, wait, can you say that in a nicer way? I hear you. I want to hear you, but can you say it in a nicer way? If we can remember that about ourselves, we have a much better chance of influencing the conversation and pausing there and then moving forward as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And sometimes it's hard, as you say, in the moment to be able to make that switch. But you can call for a timeout and say, can we continue this conversation, in a few days or next week? Because I just need some time to like reorient myself.
Absolutely. So I imagine, and this kind of comes to the point, like when we get flooded in a conversation, or when we just feel so overwhelmed that we don't know how to move forward entirely. And that can happen in speaking too. So when you have the moments like I did, where all of a sudden system is overloaded and I forget everything, how do you help people who have that fear, or when that inevitably happens? What do you recommend?
Yeah, well, I have a course called Think on Your Feet for practicing just that. Like, how do you
Great.
get comfortable speaking spontaneously and learn to relax and trust into it? And a lot of it starts with being present, being embodied in yourself. So I have people practice connecting to themselves physically. I have them close their eyes in front of everyone and they narrate what they are doing to connect with themselves. They may be feeling their breath or feeling the position of their feet. They may be hearing sounds around them or temperature or clothing, but this gives everybody a sense of how I can connect to myself in a physical way in the presence of other people. So when you are in that place of presence and you learn to, and we practice clearing our mind as we listen, because what happens is after somebody speaks, we reflect back to them what we loved and appreciated about it, what they said. So everybody is listening for what they like and appreciate. And that, again, it's like we're focusing on what we like and appreciate as opposed to what's not working. Because I believe that we actually grow more when we know what does work, what resonates, what's strong, because then we know what to do more of. When we only hear about what's not working, where the red marks are, then we don't know really what we should do more of. We just know, oh, I shouldn't do that. And so we're focused on what I shouldn't do rather than what is really working. And then as we're watching other people, listening to other people, and we see things, oh, I love how that person started with a story, or I love how that person kind of wound their way into what they wanted to say. It's like there's no one way. We just learn to appreciate the way people express themselves, and that gives us the freedom to feel more comfortable with how we express ourselves and to allow ourselves to be more experimental and also have strategies for times that we might mess up. How do we use our mess ups? Like, what do we say when we forget where we are? In my book, I give a bunch, I don't know, 5 or 6, half a dozen ways of dealing with when you stumble and you forget what you were doing, or if you made a mistake, or if you don't know the answer.
Mhm.
If you have a sense of how to handle these things, if you had a sense when you were in fifth grade of how to handle if you forgot the steps, you would have continued on and you would have gone to the very end of that
Mhm.
dance and taken a bow, and people would have clapped because you know what? No one knew what the dance was supposed to look like. Only
Mhm.
you. So
Mhm.
there was zero judgment coming from the audience about it. It was only your concern that you had forgotten.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That sparked something for me around comparison. And you were talking about appreciating. You can appreciate how that person shares a story, or how that person structured what they're talking about, or you can appreciate someone's clothes. So is appreciation then how people get out of the comparison trap? Because I imagine with TED and all of the big speaking platforms now, and how many speakers we can see, that comparison comes up.
I think there are several ways to go about it. One,
Mhm.
I think, is looking at what you like and appreciate, but I want to share another approach because I struggled with this very, very
Mm.
deeply. In fact, it's why I stopped teaching dance way back when, because I was so professionally jealous of my colleagues who were doing similar things as me. And I was convinced they were doing it better than me and they were having more success. Not, no, I felt good about my teaching, but in terms of marketing, they were getting people into their classes. I had no idea how to get into mine. And I remember stepping into a public bathroom and closing the door, and I saw a flyer on the back of the stall of this promoting this class, of the same kind of class that I did, and I just burst into tears. And I thought, I hate this feeling of jealousy. When I became an online entrepreneur, I was a little concerned it was going to come up again, even though it was more than a decade later. I was hopefully a little more mature, but I wasn't quite there. And so I did some research and I came across this one idea. I can't remember the person who wrote about it. And I thought, this is it. When we see people who we feel jealous of, it's triggering our desires.
Mhm.
And if we allow ourselves to really honor, well, what is it about this person that I'm jealous of? Oh, it's that they have a following, or they have a beautiful sales page, or they are on all these podcasts, or whatever it is that they're doing. Then you can say, yeah, I want that too. And it's showing me the path of my desires. And when I
Mhm.
can bring it back to how they are allowing me to connect with my true desires. And actually, sometimes I don't want what they have. I see,
Mhm.
like if I go down, I say, well, why am I jealous? Is it because of this? I go, no, not because of that. So it allows you to actually filter out what your desires are and what they actually aren't.
Mhm.
And when you realize that, then you can put that on your own manifestation journey, if you will, of saying, that is the path I want to go on. Do you hear that, universe? Lead me
Mhm.
in that direction.
Mhm.
Because in truth, we can only be on our own path. And the more we accept and honor exactly where we are in the journey and enjoy the becoming, the happier we are.
Mhm. Yes, you're so wise, Linda. I
Oh,
love
thank
talking
you.
with you. There's so many underpinnings of just great wisdom that apply to all areas of our lives. And people end up asking that question in relationships. They end up asking, is this the right relationship? Or so and so over there, like they seem to be having more sex, or they don't seem to fight as often, or they're having more fun. And it puts all of the power outside of ourselves. And so this reframe that you just gave of, wait, what is it that I'm actually seeing? And what is it about it that I seem to want? And I love connecting it to our desire, because for me, desire, I think, can be elusive at times. I don't think we have full control over what our desires are. Like, we're going to desire them, and resisting it is futile, and embracing it tends to work better, so that it can either transmute and come true, or we decide we no longer want it. You know, some desires, they go away after a while. I had a desire for a keyboard around Christmas, and I ended up getting one, but I had realized I'd had this desire since March. And I was kind of like, do I actually want this? Like, is it one of those things where I'm going to get it and then like never play it? But when I had seen a note back from March, I was like, wait, no, this is a desire that is lingering. And so when we can pay attention to, like you said, what is it that I want? It's almost like it brings this elusive piece of us to the surface. And then all of a sudden we have more agency around what we can do with it. And so whether it's in speaking or in dance or in our relationships, we all of a sudden are given this gift of, wait, now I know what I want. And when we know what we want, we can move towards it much quicker than not knowing what we want, which gives us this like menu sampler of 50 plus options. And how do you pick from there? I love that you brought in that reframe. It's so good.
Yeah, it took me a long time to recognize that desire was a beautiful thing. Somehow in my upbringing, I looked at desire as something bad. You shouldn't desire. Desire was evil, or I don't know. I'm not even Catholic, but somehow I absorbed that idea. And it wasn't until I think maybe following some Eastern practices, maybe it was like Deepak Chopra talking about the different chakras and the idea of desire and allowing ourselves. You know, I was thinking, why is desire part of one of the chakras? And I went, oh my gosh, it is almost like a GPS of where we want to go. Like without desire, as you say, it's like we're kind of like in a, what are those rivers that not tidal waters, but they kind of like spread sideways because there's no boundaries. There's no like,
I don't know what they're called, but I'm with you.
Estuary, it's not estuary, but whatever, floodplains or something like that. The desire keeps us focused in a direction and in a pathway. Yeah.
I love that. So it actually gives us a chance to have somewhere to flow and to have the stream go rather than wandering.
Right. And then we get that satisfaction of all the different places that we arrive to along that journey of our desire.
That's beautiful. So we've talked about a lot of things. We've talked about the beliefs that come up when we might be scared to speak. We've talked about ways to restore safety. We've talked about the patterns that show up and how even if we get rid of the belief, then we still have to, do the work of addressing the patterns, and that can take some time afterwards. We've talked about comparison and alternative pathways pointing us to our desire. So, using our voice is one of the most human things we can do. I believe sharing our story is one of the most powerful things we can do because it helps people feel less alone. And so if there's someone listening who's like, okay, I want to start using my voice more, or I want to experiment with it, I want to play around with putting my voice out there more, do you have any immediate tips or a challenge for them to start doing that?
Yes. Well, first of all, I would encourage you to go out and get Delight in the Limelight, my book. I think that if you do feel some sense of inhibition about using your voice, you will resonate with my story there and how I helped myself and other people to get through it. What I would recommend as a tip is to start inside your comfort zone. Who do you already feel comfortable speaking with? And how can you make it even more fun? What would that look like? What would that feel like? What would it sound like if you took the boundaries or the limitations that you set in terms of the rules of engagement or the rules of self-expression, and you stretch them out just a tiny bit?
Mhm.
What might that look like? Would it be a little more playful, a little more dramatic, a little more surprising? Can you let yourself do something surprising? And as I said, don't do this where you don't feel comfortable. Do it where you already feel comfortable.
Mhm.
Or maybe it's just by yourself as you take a walk in a field or down the street and you skip a few steps instead of walk. Or you swagger a little bit from your car to the grocery store, under your jacket, and nobody even can see you, but you're letting your hips swing more, or whatever it is, to allow yourself to go outside your boundaries a little bit in a fun, playful way. That's what I would suggest. And you can do that with your speaking. You can do it the way you express yourself with your body, with the expressions that you make, how you emphasize your words as you tell your story. There's so many ways to play.
That is beautiful. I love that you brought in more than just, your speaking voice. It can be expressions and whatnot as well. And you can shed, like we've talked about this in other episodes, but you can shed different layers of your identity on a daily basis. You don't have to be the same person that you were yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And so if you have an inkling of the answer to any of these questions Linda just posed, then I would challenge you to step out and just try an ounce of it and see what happens. Because having to be the same person every single day, day in and day out, can get rather boring, and you have the chance to grow. So, Linda, thank you so much for being here. I deeply appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us and some of the tips that you provided as well.
Oh, thank you so much. And I would love to continue the conversation with any of your listeners. If you want to do that, you can. Maybe the best way to do that is to come over to my website, where you can download a speaker empowerment kit where I guide you through mental rehearsal, visualization, as we spoke about earlier in this episode. And you can leave me a message there. We can chat.
And what is the URL?
That would be empowermentkit.me.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Or you can find me anywhere. I love to hang out on TikTok, but you can find me anywhere with my name, because it's pretty unusual. Linda Ugelow, Ugelow.
Awesome. I've seen your TikTok. I love it. It's great. Thank you so much for being here. And to those of you listening in or watching the show, thank you. And we will be back next week with another episode of Make It Mentionable. See you then. You've just finished listening to another episode of Make It Mentionable with me, your host, Alyssa Patmos. If you're looking for more in between episodes, then sign up for The Peel. It's my free newsletter that gives tips for how to navigate whatever life dishes. And it's also the place where I share the juiciest of stories. To check it out, head on over to alyssapatmos.com/The Peel. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.